This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. And thanks to our hosts, Alan, of course, and the Institute of Historical Research and the Archives and Society Seminar Group. We are Fleur Soper, Louise Piffero and Kate Wheeler. We work in archive sector development at the National Archives. Our roles are about gathering and sharing knowledge of archive collections and providing advice on good practice wherever these collections are held. Thank you, welcome, it's a full house. In our work at the National Archives, we seek to support people and collections across and beyond the archive sector, advising the private and public sectors on how to better care for records and archives. Now, this delivers our leadership role under the Historical Manuscripts Commission warrant and our responsibilities inherited from the former Museums, Libraries and Archives Council. So part of our work to do this tries to identify gaps in knowledge or in collections themselves and work to remedy these gaps, often focusing on particular themes and areas. In this case, archiving the arts. This work aims to support arts archives held in many places by organisations and individuals. It takes a practical approach, aiming to make these collections more discoverable and encouraging new partnerships to share skills and knowledge. We work on the principle that the more we know about collections, the safer they are. We know about the location and nature of collections, how they're being cared for, and who by. So gathering and sharing knowledge of collections impacts on the wider network of ownership and access. Our session today will explore the value of arts archives. Why do we care and why are they important?
So what's different about arts archives? They've got all the same qualities as other types of archive material, but they're created by or related to an arts organisation or an individual artist, and this can be in the broadest sense. So these could represent any art form, so from theatre to music, literature and visual art. They're the documentation of an artwork or creative activity, and they're usually unique. So they could range from the administrative records of a gallery to the music manuscripts of a composer, and also even the video recordings of a theatre company's rehearsals. They can be held in a range of places, so university special collections, the individual artist or organisation who produce them can hold their records, or even a local office. And they can also vary massively in format and condition. So what is the value of these widely varying collections, and why should we care about them? Arts archives are the backstory of our society's cultural memory. They're the witness to the creative process behind internationally renowned works of art, and the story of the setting up and running of our arts institutions. Arts archives provide another story to a completed piece of art, whether that's a painting, a piece of music, or a theatre production. They document the creative process, the business transaction, and why certain decisions were made. Thinking about what arts archives can tell you, I like to use the example of the creation and production of an opera. So the archive can tell us where the composer got the idea from, which text it might have been based on. This could include any correspondence with librettists or publishers, drafts of music manuscripts, and details on the first performance, and lots more besides that as well. So the archive gives you a way into this creative process and behind the scenes of how this opera was produced. It provides a different story to the finished piece and performance that you can't get from just watching or listening alone. And this is a value not only to researchers on the composer or on the opera in a historical sense, but it's also a value to musicians looking to perform the piece now. So arts archives not only have value for the information they contain for research purposes, they're also fantastically well placed to be reused for creative purposes. An example of this comes from the Sheffield-based theatre company Forced Entertainment. The company started video recording each of their performances, improvisation sessions and rehearsals from the early 90s onwards, and these archives are now held at the British Library. In a recent interview with Tim Etchells, the director, he explains how capturing improvisation sessions, as well as the finished piece, was not only of benefit to their creative practice as a memory tool, but would also become valuable to them as an archive which inspired new work. So the archive can be reborn and reused. So to paraphrase Tim Etchells, A fragment of archive material became the occasion for a conversation in the present. So I've talked a bit about what is the value of arts archives, but it's not only about knowing that these records are important, it's about actively valuing them. Valuing something means that you care about it, and caring about something means you will look after it. If people value their own archives and archives more generally, then they're much more likely to be cared for and therefore can survive for future use. To make sure archives can be used in the future, we need to also think about the care of current records, as they're the archives to come. This is particularly important for those records in digital format, as without actively managing and preserving these types of records, they may become unreadable and unusable fairly quickly. And this is certainly something we've tried to tackle and discuss through Archive the Arts with those we've been in conversation with. So arts archives have value for research, for revealing another story about an artwork, and also for their potential as inspiration for creative reuse. Actively valuing records and archives mean they're more likely to be well managed, can survive, and be used in the future.
So helping people to see the value in their archive and then take steps to preserve and enhance that value has been a key aspect of what we've done in Archive the Arts. And to do that, well, we've spent significant amounts of time with people from arts institutions, working with them and their collections individually. But actually, as our work has become more established, we've realised that we've come to understand that working with people individually is only part of the story. Because one of the great strengths of the archival sector is our ability to reach out, to connect, and to share knowledge. We're very good at coming together to inspire and support each other. So for the people who are looking at these new and emerging collections that are just climbing up the evolutionary scale kind of stuff to archive, it's really important that we plug them in to these existing archival networks, where that's appropriate for them, and it's not always. And also that we help them to make and form their own connections. Sometimes these are much less formal, with other archives. So what does that mean in practice? Well, this is kind of a mashup of lots of different people we've been working with. Imagine an excellent art centre in a major UK city. It's been going since the late 50s, and it's changed a lot since then. It's gone through building changes and funding cuts and controversy and all those other things that any good arts venue should always go through. But the first director insisted on keeping good records, and that practice has been kept up. Not formally, there's never been an archivist, but in a variety of cupboards and basements all over the building, things have been put away. And now they've got some money, the whole building is about to be refurbished, and so all those cupboards have been opened, and everyone's starting to ask what they're going to do with all that paper, all of those old hard drives, and those boxes of photos from 1979. And what should they do? Well, actually, I don't think there's a perfect answer to that question. What they need to do is become equipped to make a decision that works for them, and works for them long term, and for their unique situation. And that's a decision which actually gives all of that stuff the best possible chance to evolve into an archive that has value and is going to be used. So, rather like someone who's equipping themselves to climb Everest, they need to gather and process an awful lot of information in, well, actually really similar areas to a mountaineer. Like, what do I need? Is the current climate hostile for this kind of project? How much is it going to cost? Can I get funding? And how do I avoid getting stuck halfway and having to be embarrassingly rescued? Now, we can help with all of those questions, and we do our best to help. But one of the most useful things they can do is to talk with people who've made the climb before and have real experiences of the challenges they're going to face. Because behind all of those questions is the biggest question of all, which is, why am I going to do this? Now, Mallory may have climbed Everest because it was there, but it's a really unusual funding body of board of directors who will resource an archive just because one happens to be accidentally collected. There needs to be a reason to do it, and a reason to do it now. Now this is where the example of other organisations kicks in, because they can tell you, to keep on with my metaphor, what changes when you've conquered your project. So when you stand on top of Everest, what changes in your perspective, what shifts? We've got some really good examples here today of projects that have shifted things, have created huge and really bold and important and innovative ideas which have changed the way we think about what's possible to achieve with arts archives. And actually tonight is a really good example of people working to share that knowledge and keep those questions going and be generous with their experience. And I think it's really important that they're encouraged and enabled to keep doing this, because the research and other work coming out of arts archives is remarkable. One project we're supporting is the HRC-funded research performing the Jewish Archive. I encourage you to look it up if you haven't heard of it. And it's looking at restaging music and theatrical performance from the cultural record of Jewish cultural activity. It's asking really good questions as part of the research. Some of them about what does it mean to reform cultural works of people who are deprived of their voice, their identity, often their lives, creatively took part in. Can performing an archive do something to help us connect with people who are lost to us and stories that are lost to us? Can it tell us something honest that other bits of history, other archives can't? I want to know the answers to that question, and I'm really thrilled that arts archives are one of the main ways that we can help answer them. So fundamentally, I care about arts archives because they offer such a clear and visceral way into the lives and stories of real people. So I think it's entirely fitting that Archiving the Arts has shown that it's through making connections now, sharing experiences, meeting up, talking, doing things like this, that we can best support this emerging sector and safeguard our cultural heritage for future generations.
So our key work with arts organisations has been very practical in lots of ways. We've worked to unlock funding, we've established relationships with organisations who've undertaken archive projects before, and we've helped organisations deposit with established archives, all of these things. But fundamentally, the key thing we've tried to do is help organisations and individuals to understand the value of their records, the fascinating stories and legacies that these documents, films and manuscripts can provide, and how important it is to make sure these archives are accessible and useful in years to come.
So to conclude, we have a rich arts scene in the UK and across the world, and we acknowledge that it's underfunded and under-resourced in many cases. It's the talent, creativity and tenacity of our arts people, groups and organisations that really keep this going. Artists and practitioners have to work hard to sustain their work and to keep their place in the arts scene. So to share this rich legacy, we need strong archives of the arts to drive this, to document creative and business processes, to support inspiration and understanding, and to perpetuate an ongoing cycle of work and learning. Arts archives are rich sources which deserve support and exploration within the wider cultural scene. This work has raised questions of archival, artistic and cultural value, and of the relationships between archives and finished artworks. Without the artwork, what is the archive? Without the archive, what does the artwork tell us? Archiving the Arts is designed to facilitate debate, to encourage arts people and archivists to find their own answers to these and other questions, and so inform best practice in building collections which respect the needs of creators and curators, and are there for users to discover and enjoy. Though they may appear static, with their carefully ordered storage structures and packaging, archives are about activity. Someone did something, it was recorded and documented, it was selected and became part of the archive. So, as Kate and Louise have described, they can and have been very active. And archives are also about people, who they were, what they did, what they thought. When we engage with archives, we bring those activities back to life, telling the stories behind key decisions and their impacts, and behind essentially creative activity, the stories behind the book, the poem, the performance. We've some amazing examples coming up from our colleagues of how arts archives are created, cared for and shared. As Alan said, this is a celebration of archiving the arts and the work of colleagues in many places as we move into a phase of our work where people can take the principles and run with them, to build collections and sustainable approaches to access and use, to learn from colleagues about their work with dance, theatre, literary and visual arts archives, and to be inspired by the potential of collections for research and creative exploration.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do is we'll go through our little mini case studies now, and we'll start off with me. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about National Gallery Archives. So National Gallery is not a small institution, it's a big institution, it's got a long tradition of keeping its archives. But I should point out as well, it's important to recognise that the National Gallery isn't just about all kind of nice creative things and the stories behind the paintings. It's also very much a business archive as well, and I think sometimes that gets forgotten about. that, I mean, we have finance records, we have development records, we have HR, buildings, and that kind of thing. And so the archive of the National Gallery gets used for a whole load of purposes. It can be used for checking property rights, or it can be used for digging back into the sort of financial accounts, that kind of thing. But of course, it also has a lot of records about the paintings, the artworks that are in the collection, and it will get used for a lot of research purposes for that. So that could be our programme of scholarly catalogues that we're producing, that could be research for an exhibition, it could be specific research projects. So, for example, a few years ago, we carried out a major exercise researching paintings that had a lack of provenance between 1933 and 1945, the Nazi period, in order to try to ascertain ownership of those paintings. So it can be used for all of those kind of things. And then, of course, a lot of museums and galleries, not just the National Gallery, but Tate, the V&A, they will also collect archives as well. So they will collect the archives of commercial galleries that will add to our knowledge, to our overall picture of the arts world. They will collect artist papers. I mean, we don't deal with artists pre-1900, so we don't get much opportunity to get their papers, but someone like the Tate will collect artist papers, and that kind of thing. The V&A will specialise in archives of art and design. So they bring all of those papers in as well, and then they can be used as a research tool. And I think they're being used now, archives, more and more actually, in more innovative ways. So I think they're being used in that traditional sense of people coming into the archive and looking at the material and then going through it and doing their research on whatever project or whatever artist that they're interested in. They're also being used as a tool by museums and galleries to push material, to push research material out to people by digitisation initiatives, and certainly the National Gallery is often involved with the Getty Research Institute trying to do that, to push material out there. And we also actually were funded by the Paul Mellon Fund for a massive digitisation project around Raphael that exists on our website. So we kind of engage in those sorts of things as well. And also, an area that particularly interests me is the kind of increasing use of archives in exhibitions, which I find particularly interesting. And that's what I really wanted to talk about briefly today as a couple of examples. So I'm kind of dash across the screen. Yeah, I could do I know it's not great in this room actually, but if we kind of turn the lights off, we'll probably plunge into darkness, especially as that's gone off. I think we go. What's that? Blue. That's a bit better. So this was an exhibition that I worked on, which was really about the relationship between Turner and Claude, and it was how Turner derived inspiration from Claude's work, really. And then this final room was turned into this archive room. And so what we wanted to do there, though, was, I think, as Fleur and Kate and Louise have been saying, was to kind of go behind some of the stories. So there's that famous story where Turner wanted two of his paintings to hang next to two paintings by Claude, and so we kind of told that story. And it's kind of interesting because after the Second World War, the National Gallery decided not to do that anymore, and there was a huge furore about it. And we could tell that story through the archives there. And we could also tell the story of why, and there's a lot of controversy around the Turner bequest, because there are people who argue that it should all be at the National Gallery, it should not be partly at the Tate, but it's a very, very complicated story. I mean, it did help us kind of get to the bottom of it really in this, although we can still have critics about it. But it also helped us tell the story of how the Turners were divided up between the National Gallery and the Tate. And actually, if I can have the next slide, please. So like in this cabinet, we had letters between the National Gallery and the Tate on the division. In actual fact, one of the letters is by Martin Butlin, who used to be a curator at the Tate. And then, rather embarrassingly, when we had the opening of this, I noticed that he was actually there, so he came along, and I forgot to ask him if he I was including it, which he did actually. He was delighted. He was absolutely thrilled that we did. So I think one of his letters was there. But it was kind of, it was an interesting moment. It shows you how, I don't know, it can show you the kind of the status of artists within the canon. It can show you, which one's the National Gallery going for, and it can show you also the kind of rise of the Tate, particularly as I suppose it's a contemporary arts organisation, really, rather than say British arts organisation, but also the position of British art as we see it. So it's an interesting way that we kind of got the archives out on display there. And then, if I have the next slide as well. I'll just give another. This was another exhibition we did recently. It was called Strange Beauty, and it was about the reception of German art during the 19th century. And so this is a recreation of the Wiesbaden altarpiece. And so what you can see, I mean, these are obviously the originals, and then here, this is where we know what panels should be there. But this, and most of this collection, not all of which is still in the National Gallery, came in the 1850s as part of the Kruger acquisition. And it was bought by the government and then just given to the gallery en masse. And then the gallery didn't really like it. And at that time, we can't do it anymore, we can't do accession. But at that time, the gallery could do accession, and they decided to sell it, well, some of it, on. And it's kind of interesting, actually, because they didn't sell the image of Christ, because I think that's too central a figure in kind of Christian story, but they did sell some of the other panels on. And what's kind of embarrassing is that now we can't trace all of these panels, so we don't know where they've exactly gone, and in some cases they've been lost. So what we could do is, where we have reproductions, we could then do reproductions of the panels, or where we couldn't get the loans in. But then there's a lot of the altarpiece that's missing, as you can see. We just simply don't know. But what we want to do is to try to tell people about the story and why we don't know and how we can piece it all together. And so exactly coming back to this idea of kind of like being able to tell you something more, something behind the scenes. So here in front of the altarpiece, we had a number of archive items on display, and that was exactly their purpose, was to tell people that story. And people really engaged with it, I have to say. I think there's I don't know if it's kind of growing interest in kind of historiography, but they really engaged with having the archive items out there on display. And you might sort of think, well, archive items out on display in an exhibition is not a big deal. But actually, for old master exhibitions, it's an increasing phenomenon that hasn't always been there. I mean, if you go back 10, 15 years ago, archives very much were sort of tucked away and weren't so readily associated in the curatorial mindset with a fine art exhibition. And of course, it's not just old masters, but particularly, I think, in the contemporary art world. We'll go on to the next slide. So obviously this is not me, but this is a slide from the Barbican exhibition of Duchamp, Cage and Cunningham, which was on a couple of years ago. It's a really great exhibition. And in this exhibition, if you can see, they kind of mix things up a lot more than they do in the National Gallery. And I think there's a different approach, because people are much more willing to accept kind of archive art equivalents or archives next to artworks. So it's quite interesting when you go to contemporary art exhibitions that you see that. And actually, when you go to the Whitechapel, and Naya, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but when you see Naya's work at the Whitechapel, I mean, she's there as the archive curator. She actually curates archive shows, and it's very, very exciting. I once had this debate with Naya about what is actually an artwork. And she loves archives. She thinks they have an aesthetic value of their own, which so she was kind of quite excited about all of those things. So I think it's interesting how archives get used in contemporary art shows. And then I just have the final slide. And then I thought I'd just finish with this, because this is Kurt Schwitters. And this is where he's actually used kind of documentary material to create an artwork. It's not kind of Duchamp thing, where he's just kind of placing a letter out there and saying that's the artwork, but he's taken it and made a collage out of it. It's quite interesting, which featured in the Schwitters in Britain show, which also incorporated archives into its exhibition. So I think they can be used for a whole range of things. I think exhibitions is a very visible, very kind of out there, public engagement kind of exercise. But I think we are digitising the archives, and we are still having them for traditional research. And I think what's good, although it is, I'm sure I don't tell anyone it's been a really challenging financial environment at the moment, but hopefully at the National Gallery and in other places, archives I'm hoping are holding their own, because I think they offer new ways of public engagement, and that's very, very important to institutions like the National Gallery at the moment, to explore those roads and to exploit them as best as possible. So that's a really, really brief overview of some of the stuff we do at the National Gallery. We do a lot of other stuff, of course, as well, but I'm happy to take questions at the end once we've had our other two case studies. And we're now going to go from the visual arts over to and I'll pass over to Arike from Rambert.
Hello, so I recognise a couple of faces, so I hope this isn't going to be really boring for those of you who have already come and visited the Rambert archive and heard a bit about what we do there. I did have a video to show you, but we don't really have audio in this room, So I completely, wholeheartedly encourage you to go onto Rambert's YouTube, where there are lots of beautiful videos, but an especially lovely one about the archive. So, has anyone heard of Rambert before, apart from people who visited me? Yeah? Oh, that's great. So Rambert is the UK's original dance company. We're the oldest existing dance company. We date our birth to the creation of the very first ballet choreographed by a British person, who's Frederick Ashton, who choreographed The Tragedy of Fashion in 1926 and heralded the birth of British ballet. We're not a ballet company anymore, we're contemporary dance. Some of our choreographers who were around at the time of the change from classical to contemporary technique would say that contemporary dance is just another word for contemporary ballet. So, there's a lot of debate about that. So, what Rambert's archive does, I think for this presentation, I think I'll just talk to you a little bit about the context of the company and about the Rambert archive, what sort of things we have, and our journey to where we are now. So what the archive itself does is collect specifically about the company and about people connected to the company, so our collaborators, our choreographers, designers, composers. So it records the extraordinary impact of our founder Mary Rambert and her company throughout the dance world, and that is a global impact. So the National Ballet of Australia, the National Ballet of Canada, they all came from or were founded by Rambert dancers. So you can see why the company is quite important in the dance world. The archive itself was established in 1982 and the company started in 1926, so that's a whole bit of UK and global dance history that was essentially not deliberately collected. So nothing was deliberately collected until 1982, apart from our founder Mary Rambert's personal collection. So she's quite an interesting lady. Her personal collection is deposited at the archive, and she always had an eye on posterity, so she deliberately collected a fair amount of things, including her own hair. So yeah, very, very strange, odd things in there. So the archive gives the company an enduring sense of its history. So the archive is the company's history, it's its identity, it's a story of Rambert, it's a story of British dance, but it's also a way for the company to have some authenticity in the dance works that it has had created on it in the course of history. So a quick example there about the importance of the archive for the authenticity of Rambert's work is a work called L'Après-midi d'un Faun, which was created in 1912, so pre-Rambert, on the Ballet Russe, Nijinsky's Ballet Russe. Mary Rambert, our founder, was part of the Ballet Russe at the time that work was created. And when she started the Rambert Company in 1931, she invited members of the Ballet Russe to come and teach that work to our company, and she was also teaching the work to the company. So our version of L'Après-midi d'un Faun has a direct line of descent from the original L'Après-midi d'un Faun, Nijinsky's. However, I think in the 60s, I'm really terrible with dates, but anyway, Nijinsky himself, after he had gone through a number of mental health issues, decided that he would try and write down all of his works. So he tried to notate Faun, not using any standard choreographic notation, which does exist, and his version of it is was then sort of translated by a dance researcher, and what she translated it as is slightly different from our version. So you can see the archive was very important then to us, for us to be able to keep being able to perform that version. So dance works are like any other artwork or intellectual property. We could have been prevented by the Nijinsky and Diaghilev's trusts from performing our version of Faun if we hadn't been able to prove our lineage of performing it and how it had been taught to the dancers. So yeah, so that's a bit of kind of context of why the archive is quite important to Rambert. and why it might be important to researchers as well who are researching dance. So in the archive there are about 500 costume items. There's original sketches, designers, choreographic notebooks and notation. We have Benesh notation, if you know what that is. We also have music scores, because a lot of our dance works have original music composed for them. There's footage, so moving image, there's photographs, there's correspondence, programs, audio recordings, oral histories, there's the contracts, all sorts of administrative material. So it's a business archive, again, like the National Gallery's collection and like Erin at the National Theatre, her collection. And it is primarily for the company. But in the past couple of years, we've been able to open it out more fully to the public. So this is just a small collection of images to show you where we are now with the Rambert collection. So that's our reading room. We are part of the company physically as well as, as well as intellectually. So we're in the same building as the dancers and the dance studios and all of the education and outreach work. The archive's in the basement, so it is underground next to the River Thames. I think for all archivists and archive students here, that's evidently like a slightly scary prospect, but we planned really, really hard for that space, and so there's plenty of protection in place there. So if you ever want to come for a tour of the Rambert archive, let me know and I'll go into more detail about that there. And we have this beautiful bespoke storage. And we've also created, and still in the testing phase for that really, this bespoke bit of software which allows us to watch digitised footage. So a lot of the footage that we have in the collection is on pre-digital formats, and we were able to have some support from the Heritage Lottery Fund to digitise that. And this bit of software just means that people can watch the clips without putting themselves anywhere near the digital files. So the digital files are protected from some element of corruption and user error or deletion, that kind of thing, but they're able to watch the files there. Okay, so how did we get to this beautiful space? Well, before we were in that space, this is where we were. So the company, the dance company, when we started, was based in Notting Hill in an old church hall that was transformed into a theatre. And Mary Rambert would give ballet recitals there, ballet performances, she'd teach, and her husband Ashley Jukes, who was at the time quite a renowned playwright, would hold theatre performances there. So T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral was premiered at that theatre, the Mercury Theatre. The stage at the Mercury was about this wide, so you couldn't really fit too many dancers on stage, and a lot of the new works had to really be moulded around the use of that really tiny space. So in the 70s, they moved to Chiswick, which was two old carpet showrooms stuck together, which meant that there was big spaces for the studios, but also meant that it wasn't really designed for dance. So you can see there's a sign from one of the studios in Chiswick which says jumping is not allowed in this studio due to structural weaknesses. As a dance company, that's really tricky. And the other images there are from the archive storage spaces, so you can see the leak in the roof in the main store. Oh, it makes me quite nervous looking at these again now. You can see over 100 years old costume just stored in plastic there, and all the other costume on an open rail. There was another costume storage space in Chiswick which was infested with carpet beetle and moth. And that was my office. So that was really nice. In fact, the building at Chiswick, I mean, now it makes me stressed to think about it. But it was a lovely building. It just didn't work for either the dancers or for the archive. And part of the reason why everything was so crammed in there is because when the archive started, which was started by Jane Pritchard, who's now the curator of dance at the V&A. So she started the archive up in 1982, the same year that Mary Rambert died. And she just had, in the open office, one shelf. And as she managed to kind of reconstitute the archive from all the places around the world that had been scattered in the years that there was no archive, it grew quite a lot, and we ended up taking over lots and lots of different spaces. I mean, if you think the leak in the archive roof is bad, our chief executive, every night she covered up her computer and her filing cabinet with plastic because water came in her office every night. So I feel like we deserve our beautiful new space, which again you're welcome to come and visit. So how did we? And another point to make about this kind of collection, which you might be thinking to yourselves, is that you wouldn't necessarily feel confident in giving things to this archive. You wouldn't feel confident we'd be able to look after it. And you can see that some of the boxes are written on marker pen, all sorts of things, and post-it notes. That's because until very recently the collection was completely uncatalogued. And so we couldn't ever find anything, which not only led to it being quite difficult for external researchers to use, but very, very difficult for people within Rambert to use, which meant that the different departments had begun to hoard their own documents and not trust the archive at all. This is a situation which has turned around completely in our new space. So, building the journey to the new space, and I don't want to deliver on too much, so I'll go through this quite quickly. As I mentioned before, we had some really lovely support from the Heritage Lottery Fund that enabled us to list, repackage, box and digitise many of the moving image formats, and we've been able to get a little bit of top-up funding from Eric Anker Peterson charity to finish that off. So this is Natalia, who now is a permanent archivist at the V&A, and Eilish, who some of you will have known from the New Professionals talk that she did. She's now an archivist at SOAS, and one of the archive volunteers, Jane, who's been with us just forever. And what they're doing there is sorting the photographs. So there's all these. This is the studio that no one's allowed to jump in. So they took all the photos out and sorted them because they were in a complete mess. And there's some of us on the building site visiting our new beautiful building. So we had Heritage Lottery support to catalogue the collections, and we also used that support to explore how to make the collections publicly interactive and accessible, and that led to some really lovely learning projects, which included Vintage Rambert, in which the young people who were composers, they were dancers, choreographers, they were lighting designers, stage managers. They were all either studying those disciplines or about to study those disciplines or thinking about those disciplines. We used the Marie Rambert collection to, because as I said before, Marie Rambert had deliberately collected this because she had a sort of very modernist idea about self-promotion and branding. An identity. So we used her collection and those kind of ideas with the young people to explore their own identities, and it culminated in creating a new dance work with them. And when we had begun that process with the HLF, our chief executive goes on record as saying that she thought it was ridiculous to ever think that the archives could be used for learning, that they could ever be used, meaningfully by the public. She thought it was just an institutional resource, and this changed her mind absolutely and utterly. So, big thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund there, and it's also changed the way that our outreach team at Rambert think about the work that they do. So previously, all of the work that our outreach team, we call it L&P, Learning and Participation, all of the work that they did was based around the existing repertory and looking at particular dance work, and then the students would learn the dance moves. And now they look at the context of how the dance work has been made, which gives a much deeper meaning to the movements if you know what the choreographer was thinking. So they use the archive quite a lot in their work now. Okay, so really quickly, so the future plans for our archive. Well, next year is Rambert's 90th birthday, so clearly we're going to use the archive a lot next year. And we've got a 3-strand project to take the archive on tour. Rambert's a touring company, so it's going to be really exciting to actually take the archive to Rambert's extended family of audiences and collaborators around the country. So hopefully we'll be able to keep growing the archive and keep keep growing it as a research resource as well as an institutional resource. And now, just in case any of you were worried about what I said earlier about the hoarding of documents, now the departments and the teams really love the archive and never leave me alone and give me things all the time. So it's really been a transformation. So I think that's all that I was going to say in my case study, just to explain a bit more about the journey that the Rambert Archive's taken and tell you a little bit about it. But I think at the end we will probably have quite a good discussion about different ways that archives are used and formed, created, issues about ownership and things like that have come up in the other discussions, because of course they apply equally to the Rambert collections. So thank you very much.
Right, and then I'll just hand over finally to Erin Lee from National Theatre, who'll give us our final little case study, little vignette of Arts Archive. Erin.
Well, thank you.
Who's using pretzel?
Busy, I am, yes. And it's a good thing I can never know what I'm going to say because I can't read my notes, which is fine. So I am Erin and I'm the archivist at the National Theatre. I thought it'd be quite good in the next kind of 10-15 minutes to give you an idea about all the projects that the archive has been involved in over the past few years and going forward, and we've got a few exciting launches in the next few months, so that we're trying to access new users and audiences as we go forward. As a quick introduction, for those of you who don't know about the National and haven't visited, I know we have a couple of people here who have seen around the NT. The archive is actually part of the learning department, and as such we're really embedded within learning projects as well as broadcast and digital projects. So because of that, we're accessing a whole load of new audiences who wouldn't otherwise have come to the archive. Now that could either have been because of distance, because of convenience, or frankly because they didn't know that we existed. So recently we've split the archive into 3 different sections so that we can start thinking about it in a slightly more organised and logical way. So the first section we have of the archive is the cultural archive, and that's probably what you think of when you think of the National Theatre Archive. So in there you have programmes, posters, production recordings, prompt script, costume bibles, that kind of thing. And then we have the business archive, which is kind of what Alan and Arike were touching on. That's the administrative side of the archive, which is used by researchers, but less so, because it's more sort of catering minutes and things like that. It's less interesting. And then we have our external collections. We have an increasing number of external collections, and these tend to be staff members or people who are involved in the founding of the National Theatre, so they can give a slightly different perspective on the whole National Theatre collection. So as some of you might know, we are currently working through a Heritage Lottery Fund grant, which will come to an end in 2015. And this grant was awarded to the National Theatre actually for their refurbishment project, which is happening. So in case any of you have been to the National, see lots of scaffolding around and a new building out of the back, right in front of Rambert, the new Max Rain Centre. That's where most of the HLF money went, but there was a small pot of money that was reserved solely for archive and learning projects. So what I want to go through this evening are some of those projects. I'll also talk about a few of the other projects that we're doing that aren't HLF related. Okay? So first up is the Fleur Learning Centre. So this is the first time that the learning department has had a dedicated learning space. So we have one space that is more like a formal lecture theatre. You can fold all the chairs away, but it is sort of for talks and those kinds of events. And then we have another space upstairs, which is called the Duffield Studio, and it has a sacrificial floor, which I had never heard of. And the sacrificial floor allows sort of craft activities, so you can get it dirty and it's fine. With this new Fleur Learning Centre, the learning department has sort of grown exponentially. So now we have an adult learning programmer along with all the other parts of learning. So we have primary education, secondary, youth, which I think counts as teenage years, community and adult. And the archive is involved in projects at all of these levels. Now obviously we're more involved in secondary education, so that's what we have now. We have archive learning days, So this is where the archive provides materials such as prompt scripts, costume bibles, programmes and the production recording. And Learning will then provide an academic or a creative who will come in and explain those materials to school groups. And they've been very popular and are obviously around the syllabus for secondary. The adult learning programme, which is new, and it's quite exciting for us because we don't have to be restricted to a syllabus. So the adult learning programmer just comes in and says, what do you want to show to adults? So it's really fun for us. So Renaissance literature is something that's coming up shortly. These tend to be related to the repertory. So Renaissance literature will go along with the Bow Stratagem, which is opening in the next month. We've also had one on In Context on David Hare when we opened Behind the Beautiful Forevers just before Christmas. We also had recently, which I've just finished, the Black Plays Archive seminars. The Black Plays Archive is basically a union catalogue that's hosted by the National Theatre. And this is a catalogue of all of the first professionally produced plays by Black, British, African and Caribbean playwrights. So obviously we don't hold all that material. We have done probably about 10 of these plays at the National Theatre, of which we will have the material. But this website allows you to access all the different archives that will hold that material. So the V&E has quite a lot, the Black Cultural Archives, etc. So this seminar series was run by the project manager of BPA, and it brought in a completely new audience to the Fleur Learning Centre and also to the archive, because we offered complimentary screenings alongside these seminars. So that was a really exciting way of bringing in a new audience that we hadn't had before in the archive. Next up, which is quite exciting, is the Sherling High Level Walkway. Now I don't presume, have any of you heard of this? It opened like a few weeks ago, you've heard. So this was an HLF funded project, and basically it is a high level walkway. You can see how high you are. So this is a free sort of tourist attraction that the National now has. It allows you access to backstage, so you can see all of the props workshops, metalwork, carpentry, and then allows you straight into the paint frame, and you can see everyone designing the sets and painting the scenery. It's open all day long, and it's a great way also for me to get to offices I need to get to. But it's brilliant for the members of the public to be able to come in and see theatre making in process. Now the archive's been involved in this because there's explanatory text that runs all the way along this walkway that explains to you what it is that you're seeing. So there's actually blackboards and it's written up in chalk what it is they're making props for, etc. But then there's also text that tells you all about why that part of the theatre was designed, how it was decided to build the drum revolve in the Olivier stage, etc. And all of that material has come from the archive, and we did all that research. So it's wonderful to be put in such a prominent position and to help people understand theatre craft. Got a couple of other learning collaborative projects. So On Demand, in our press release, our annual press release that went out in February, it was announced that we will now be rolling out On Demand NT Lives into classrooms around the UK. So the archive holds production recordings of all shows from 1995 onwards, and you can come and watch that in the archive for free. And that includes NT Lives, which, in case anyone doesn't know what NT Live is, that's the live broadcast of shows to cinemas around the world. But now, for those schools who can't make it to the archive and to our screening facilities, they'll be able to sign up to the on-demand service for free, and they'll be able to see NT Lives of Hamlet, Frankenstein and Othello. And we're hoping that that will grow over the next few years. So that's quite exciting. It's yet to be seen how that affects our visitor numbers in the archive. But hopefully people will still come in who came in before, because they'll get to see the material, the prompt scripts, that kind of thing. So hopefully it won't affect us too much. Archive teacher placements. This has been an HLF funded project. It's been quite exciting and quite challenging for us. So we've welcomed in 9 teachers, and there's been a mix of primary and secondary English and drama. And these teachers have come with a variety of foci. Some of them have come in wanting to look at the history of the National Theatre. Some have been interested in sort of children's adaptations or Greek drama. And we've asked them to come in and engage with the materials and come up with resources, either for their own classroom or to be put on the NT website and for wider dissemination. And we've found with most of them that they've actually led on to learning projects. So they've contributed to the archive learning days on Greek drama and Frankenstein. and it's been quite interesting for us. It's just getting harder to see. It's been quite interesting for us to see what teachers actually find useful in the archive, rather than our learning department guessing. So that's what's been quite interesting for me. So I now know when I present to a school group, I kind of know better which things to pinpoint that will help students. So at the moment, this is totally HLF unrelated. The archive is working with University of the Arts London on its ME Curating and Collecting course. So the NT Archive took in the Jocelyn Herbert archive in autumn last year. Jocelyn was one of our first theatre designers, and she was also a founding member of the National Theatre. Her collection was at the University of the Arts, and it's now transferred to the National Theatre, and as part of that transfer we agreed that we would support students in their work at UAL. So this is a new course, it's in its first year, and the second term focuses on Jocelyn Herbert's working relationship with Samuel Beckett. So we've welcomed all of these 25 students into the archive. None of them have a theatre or drama background. None of them have studied English. Quite a lot of them are actually from Asia or Australia, and so they're not particularly familiar with British theatre. So it's been quite a steep learning curve for all of us. This is also a very new collection to the archive, so for us it's been a very steep learning curve, actually finding where things are, and what all of the sort of reference numbers mean, etc. But this, they have to basically curate an exhibition. Each of them has to create an exhibition, so we're going to have 25 exhibitions in Wimbledon Space, which opens next week. They've loaned all the material from the archive, and they're each going to exhibit on an aspect of Jocelyn's relationship with Samuel Beckett. So I'm really interested to see what they come up with, because they've been coming at it from very different directions, and they've been spotting quite a lot of relationships between Jocelyn's work and work in the National Theatre collection. And I think over the next few years, as we do this more and more, hopefully we'll understand Jocelyn's collection much better, and our own learning department will start using it much more in their education programmes. It's great. I don't know what's coming next. Concrete reality. So, if I can see, yes. So this is an HLF funded project, and Concrete Reality is the exhibition that's going to open the Wolfson Gallery, which is the new name for the Olivier exhibition space, if ever you've been to the NT to look at exhibitions. Basically, this exhibition will celebrate the end of NT Future, which is a refurbishment which has been going on for 3 years, but also celebrate Dennis Lasdon, who was the National Theatre's original architect, and the building of the building on the South Bank in 1976. Architects get very excited about concrete, I have discovered. And actually part of the HLF grant that we have is for concrete apprentices. So we have 2 concrete apprentices who are studying the structure of concrete and how it is refurbished. So there's a big focus on concrete, and a lot of the material that's going into this exhibition is from our archive. And surprisingly, it's from the business archive. It's from the building committee minutes, from the late 60s and early 70s, which were around the kind of pulling together of a job description for the architect, and then actually choosing Dennis Lasdon, and then the plans of how he was going to design the building. Dennis Lasdon had never designed a theatre before, and so wasn't entirely sure what he should be doing. And so a lot of the minutes that we have are discussions back and forward between him and the building committee. He used to give them questionnaires about what they wanted from their theatre and that kind of thing. So it's lovely that we have the responses of Laurence Olivier and Peter Hall and Jocelyn Herbert as to what it was they wanted in the building on the South Bank. So it's exciting to be able to give those such a public airing, because the business archive, nobody really knows that much about it. So this should open in April. And next, this is the most exciting thing I have to present on, the Littleton Lounge. This is my wonderful archive poster. I have an archive poster. So this space will open next month. I think it has a soft launch at the end of this month. The Littleton Lounge will be the first time that the archive is being showcased front of house at the National Theatre. So the actual archive is based at the NT Studio, which is next to the Old Vic on the Cut. And so the archive has never been before been shown on the main site. And I think, as some of you will probably know from wherever you work, like the NT is very forward-looking, very fresh, trying to get them to put their archive front of house and basically front of stage is quite difficult. But the Littleton Lounge has succeeded to do that. It's HLF funded. It's also been funded by our American associates of the National Theatre. So this space will be both physical and digital. And it will allow you to look at the history of the National Theatre from yesterday right back to 1963, when we were founded and we were housed at the Old Vic. So there'll be a physical aspect to this. There's going to be a physical exhibition, but most of the content you'll see will be digital, and you'll be able to look at that on your own device, or you'll be able to hire an iPad from the book shop. So we've never before done an iPad loan scheme, so this has kind of been a bit of a learning curve as well. So that's basically it. Hopefully, as I explain the exhibitions, it'll become clearer why there's a physical and a digital. This is, in case you kind of know the NT, this is the Littleton Circle Foyer. So this is where the Littleton exhibition space was, which I think if you remember, the exhibitions were always totally unrelated to theatre and nothing to do with the archive. They were sort of the landscape photography exhibition, that kind of thing, which does bring money in, so commercial exhibitions do bring money into the NT. But we've decided with our new exhibition spaces we want to showcase the archive, or at least theatre. So that's our aim with these. So we're opening with 2 exhibitions. The digital interface will actually bring together all of the digital platforms of the National Theatre into one place. So be able to see every digital platform that the archive has contributed to. So that will be the Google Cultural Institute, the Black Plays Archive, the app that we did for the 50th anniversary. You'll be able to see all of that in the one place. Because I find it quite difficult to find them all separately on the internet. So I'll bring them all together in one place. The plan is to do 6 exhibitions on a rolling schedule throughout the year. There'll be smaller ones and larger ones. So this is a small one we're opening with, which we're calling a popcorn collection. Archiving 10 Objects does what it says on the tin. And we've included in there some things that you'd expect. So we have production images. Had to put one of Benedict Cumberbatch in. He's the biggest draw to the archive. But then we also have things in there that you might not expect the archive to have. So one of them are little tiny slides of directors' portraits that were projected onto the wall at the 21st anniversary gala of the building on the South Bank. And they're wonderful. It's like a tiny Laurence Olivier. And so we have those in there. And we also have, so this is box office signage. So when the building was designed in 1976, Ken Briggs, who was our original graphic designer, designed a new font for the National Theatre, and he also designed our signage to go front of house. But in the 1990s refurbishment, that was taken down, given to the archive. But what's really lovely is that the architects who are doing the refurbishment now are returning to the signage, and they came to visit the archive about a year ago and asked for all the signage we brought up, and they looked at it and they loved it. And they're bringing back the font and the size, but they're just having it in a slightly darker metal. So it's lovely to put that in the caption in the archive in 10 Objects. Kind of brings it back to life for people. And then we have a puppet. There's dark materials. Almost got to stick a puppet in. But this is the large exhibition that we're opening with. So Tom Stoppard, with his new play, The Hard Problem, I don't know if anyone's heard of The Hard Problem, that's on in the Dorfman Theatre at the moment. We really wanted to celebrate Tom Stoppard's relationship to the National Theatre over the past 6 decades. And so we've chosen 5 landmark plays. Now each of these plays has in some way changed the way of theatre making at the National. And in the digital exhibition, you'll be able to see each of these 5 plays, as well as some extra information, like there's a timeline, etc. And the physical exhibition will feature those particular items that show you the rationale for that play being in the app. So it's a little bit complicated. I'll use one play as an example. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. This was put on in 1967 in the Old Vic. Now the reason that it is in the exhibition is that this was the first play of the NT to transfer to Broadway. So in the app you'll be able to see there'll be a synopsis of the play if you haven't seen it before. There'll then be a paragraph which is the rationale for it being in the exhibition, and then we'll have an archive gallery, and in there you'll have some nice production images as you'd expect. But then the main thing, the crux of this, is this set of telegrams. So we have 5 or 6 telegrams from David Merrick, who's the director in Broadway, to Laurence Olivier and Kenneth Tynan, saying that he just has to put Rosencrantz and Guildenstern on. And this is my favourite one. Dear Larry, I am absolutely mad about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Stop. Please do everything you can to get it from me. Stop. So it's just lovely to have these. Also, no one really looks at telegrams anymore. So it's lovely to have these in there. And there's this series. Each telegram is about 2 weeks after the one before, and you just get more and more and more desperate as it goes along. And then we have 2 photographs of it in Broadway. So this, you can see Rosencrantz and Guildenstern at the Alvin Theatre in Broadway. And these are people queuing for tickets, and they have a tea trolley. I just think that's wonderful. We should have that now. So that's really the crux of why that show is in the exhibition. So the telegrams are what you'll see on the wall, and that'll be the physical aspect of it. So that if you're in the Littleton Lounge in the interval of a show or just before a show, and you're just have time to look at the physical exhibition, it all hangs together and makes sense. And then there'll be a hint to say, go and get more content on your iPad. So next time you come in, you'll come in half an hour earlier and hopefully engage with a bit more archive content then. So that's kind of most of the projects we're working on at the moment. I should say this launches next month, so please do come and see it. And in that space we're also going to have duplicate archive production boxes and drawers of props and costumes, so that you can come along and hopefully children will get involved and they'll like seeing all that kind of thing. And you can rifle through archive production boxes. They are duplicates. You can rifle through them and it'll give you an idea of what it's like to visit the archive. And we're producing a new archive leaflet that will go alongside this to show you how to come to the archive if you have an inquiry. So through all these projects, the main aim of the archive and the learning department is to show you theatre making, which you see in the Sherling High Level Walkway, and then you see the production on stage, and then you get the end of the life story of a production with it coming to the archive, and you then see it in the Littleton Lounge. So we're trying to immerse our audience in theatre, and hopefully that will work. So that's everything. Thank you.